Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fortune podcast or YouTube video, whichever one you are watching on. Today, as you could tell by the title, we're going to talk about four players that I'm currently fading at their ADP in fantasy football. So, if you're watching on YouTube, you probably saw CJ Stroud on the thumbnail. So, let's just dive into him first. Now, before I start talking about him, I do not think he's going to be this ginormous bust. There's a difference between a player that's a bust and a player that I just think their ADP is too expensive. So CJ Stroud, there's another guy on this list I'll get into as well, but CJ Stroud, so he's valued as the quarterback 5. He was the quarterback 11 last season, 18.7 points per game, threw for 4,100 yards with 23 touchdowns, 5 picks. My biggest problem with him being valued here is obviously, first of all, we've never seen him perform as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. And secondly, he doesn't have the rushing upside that all these other guys up in this elite tier of fantasy quarterbacks have. Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, obviously. Mahomes even has a little bit of rushing upside. Anthony Richardson and Lamar Jackson. CJ Stroud's a huge outlier here. Only 12% of Stroud's fantasy points came from rushing last season, and out of the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks in 2023, 3 of them had 30% or more of their points come from rushing. That is huge for fantasy football. Allen Hurts and Lamar, if you were wondering. The other two were Dak and Jordan Love. Dak was 10% rushing, but he was literally the second. He was the runner-up in MVP voting, 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns, 9 picks. And Love over 4,000 yards, 32 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. So I don't think that, that type of season for Stroud is out of the realm of possibility. Don't get me wrong, which is why I'm going to repeat. I don't think CJ Stroud is going to be this bust um, as much as I would root for it as a Colts fan. But he is literally going to have to be one of the front runners for MVP to return this value. Like I said, that could happen, but that's not how you win fantasy football drafts. You don't draft people at their absolute ceiling and hope that they can just absolutely explode. You try to draft the guys that can beat their ADP. Like maybe I'm not credible here, but literally Anthony Richardson right behind him or Kyler Murray, these guys that are valued lower that have significantly more upside because of their rushing, they could crush their ADPs. Both of those guys could be top 3 fantasy quarterbacks. And like I said, CJ Stroud could be too, but he's going to have to be the MVP. Those other guys can bring half their production on the ground. And then lastly, the difference in fantasy points per game from the quarterback 2 last year, which was Jalen Hurts, and the quarterback 12 in terms of points per game, Patrick Mahomes, was only 3.5 fantasy points per game. And 14 quarterbacks in the NFL averaged over 18 fantasy points per game. So the point there is that there's a ton of deep value at the quarterback position in 2023. Like Jared Goff, he's the quarterback 12 right now, but he was the quarterback 7 last year. Love is the quarterback 10. He was the quarterback 5 last year. Kirk Cousins is quarterback 18. He was quarterback 7 in points per game before he got hurt. Purdy is quarterback 11. He was QB 6 last year. Mayfield is QB 22. He was QB 10 last year. The list goes on. The point is that there is so much more value. Like, I'm not even talking about Trevor Lawrence, who I think has upside, Justin Herbert, who got knocked out of the top 15, Matt Stafford, who put up MVP numbers 2 years ago and was on pace to be way better than he finished last year before he got hurt. There is so much value um, outside of the top 10. If you're not going to have a rushing quarterback, or if you want to target a rushing quarterback that doesn't need to be this MVP type of player. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Hopefully, I tried to explain it as well as I could, but it just, all the drafts I've been doing, CJ Stroud sitting there, I'm thinking, you know what? I could have Jordan Love in a couple of rounds and he could put up this. I mean, he outperformed him last year. And I know Stroud got Diggs, Love got Jacobs. I don't know, man. I just think it's just a way too expensive price to pay. So hopefully that makes sense. The second guy is Sam LaPorta, and I've posted videos about this before. I have a ton of shit to back this up with, so This is the guy that I was talking about similarly to CJ Stroud. I don't think he's going to be this huge bust, but his price is just ridiculous because let's just dive into it. So LaPorta finished as the tight end one last year, obviously, and he could do it again, but there's no reason you should spend your early third round pick on him. Same thing as quarterbacks. The tight end position is as deep as it's been in recent memory. So let's take a look at the top tight ends from last season. So LaPorta, tight end one, 14 points per game. Ingram, tight end two, 13.5 points per game. Neither one of those guys missed time. Travis Kelce was the tight end three, but he outperformed both of those guys, 14.6 points per game. He missed 2 games. Hawkinson, same thing, 14.6 points per game. He missed 2 games when he tore his, I think, ACL. George Kittle and David Njoku, both 12.6, 12.7 points per game. They each missed a game. And Mark Andrews, 13.5 points per game, missed obviously half the season, 7 games. Your takeaway from me reading those stats should be 7 different tight ends averaged 12 plus fantasy points. And everyone on this list except for Kelce, you can get at least 2 rounds later after Sam Laporta. It's about the value, and it's the same thing with CJ Stroud here. It's just too expensive to pay because I'm gonna keep comparing this to Travis Kelce last year, right? He was the tight end three, and in terms of points per game, he was tied with Hawkinson for tight end one overall. But guess what? He was still a bust last season, and I know because I had him. He was going in the first round. I took him fifth overall in one of my leagues. So sure, he was the tight end one and points per game, tight end three overall. That's not like this ginormous bust if you look at it like that. But if you look at it from where he was being drafted, first round, it was horrible. It was a horrible pick by me. It was a horrible pick by everyone that reached on him. So I think that could be Laporta this year. He could still be a top three tight end, but you can get Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid 3, 4 rounds later and maybe have 10 less fantasy points from them. So, oh yeah. Anyway, I was gonna say I didn't even talk about Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid, who broke out in the second half of the season. When I was talking about all those players last season, McBride averaged 15 points per game from week 8 on, which is when he became like a full-time starter. And Kincaid averaged 11.3 points per game, I think, from week 7 on, when Dawson Knox went down, and then Kincaid got injured at the end of the year. So I could have nitpicked and been like, oh, week 7 to 12, and he would have been like up with the 13, 14 points per game. But that's not that deep. Anyway, receiving yards per game among tight ends last season. You can check out. I'm gonna try to zoom through this. You can check out my draft guide in my bio if you want to see all these stats. But I'm just gonna read the order: Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, George Kittle, Evan Engram, David Njoku, Mark Andrews, and then Sam Laporta in receiving yards per game. The reason Laporta was a tight end one was because he had 10 touchdowns, while none of these guys had more than 6. I'm not saying he can't repeat that, but this is just giving me Travis Kelce vibes. Kittle had 5 less than he did the year before last season, despite leading tight ends in receiving. Andrews missed half the season. McBride and Kincaid were nobodies until the second half of the season. All of these guys could do what Laporta did last year, and they're going way later. So let's look at where they're all going. Laporta 27th overall, Kelce 28th overall. Now, you could probably make the same case for Kelce as Laporta. Like realistically, I probably would agree with that, but you never know. Anyway, 27 and 28 overall for those two. 30 picks later, 54 overall Trey McBride, 59 overall Mark Andrews, 66 overall Dalton Kincaid, 71st overall Evan Engram, who was the tight end 2 last year. George Kittle, 86th overall, has been a top 5 tight ends for like his entire fucking career. And then you got David Njoku, Kyle Pitts, and Jake Ferguson, who are all past 90th overall, who I think do have upside and could easily be serviceable tight ends. Where it's like Laporta's going in the third, and like I don't have this on top of me right now, but that seems like it's the range where like Mike Evans, who else? Stephon Diggs, although I'm not the biggest fan of Stephon Diggs. Jalen Waddle, Malik Neighbors, like he's going in the same range as those guys. Like, dude, if you're telling me I can take Sam Laporta and then at 90th overall, I could get like, well, I don't even know. Josh Palmer. I don't know. or I could take Jalen Waddle and then get Kyle Pitts. Like it's not it's not that hard to like plan out. Like I don't get it. I don't get it, fellas. So once again, I don't think Sam LaPorta is just gonna have this dog shit season. I'd even mention he's the third option on his team. No, I guess he's the second. Amon-Ra, but they're run heavy team. They throw to Gibbs. Jameson Williams supposed to have this breakout season. I just think, if you're going to be an elite tight end, like Mark Andrews, he's the first option on his team. Dalton Kincaid, he will be the first option on his team. Evan Engram, with Ridley gone, I don't know. Maybe he is the first option. He had in like insane, like he was second in receptions among tight ends with 114. Like it was nuts last year. And now Ridley's gone. So who knows? Kelsey, you can make the case. McBride will be the second option. Laporta, I don't know. There's just a lot more mouths to feed there, in my opinion. Michael Pittman, wide receiver. Okay, so I fucked this up in my fantasy guide if you are coming from that. I said he was wide receiver 11, but that was his ECR, which is expert consensus ranking on Fantasy Pros. I think his ADP is actually um towards the end of the teens, like wide receiver 18. But still, even at that price, I will say I fucked up because I was going nuts. Like, how the fuck is he wide receiver 11? But even at wide receiver 18 or 19, which he's one of the two, and I can confirm that after when I start editing this video, it's still a fade for me. So Pittman had a great year last year, finishing as the wide receiver 13 with Gardner Minshew for most of the season. Many are expecting the same type of season, if not better, with Anthony Richardson. I'm a Colts fan, and I am not. So here are some reasons I'm skeptical of his ceiling. So first of all, he doesn't score. He's had 4 years in the NFL, scored one his rookie season, and then he scored six, and then four last season. He doesn't catch the ball downfield, 25th in air yards, 45th in deep targets, and 85th in average depth of target, which is A dot. So along with his very low A dot, his ceiling is one of the lowest ceiling among the top 15 ranked fantasy receivers. Top 20, I guess. Once again, I said I fucked up, but he's never had 1,200 receiving yards in a season, despite being the wide receiver one for 4 seasons. And obviously, he's dealt with Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, Gardner Minshew, I guess. It's just a ceiling thing for me because I think Anthony Richardson is going to be a great quarterback. I do, but I don't really necessarily think it's going to help Michael Pittman or the receivers. So I obviously think Richardson is going to be better than Minshew, but a healthy Richardson and a healthy Taylor equals a rush heavy offense. And Pittman is reliant on volume, which is bound to take at least, like at the worst, a small dip. All right. So I posted this thread on Twitter and I couldn't find the stat that I found. And I just said, like, if anyone has the stat, let me know. And somebody responded to it. Another reason that I'm just a little bit skeptical. So these are the Colts target shares with Anthony Richardson versus Gardner Minshew at quarterback. So Michael Pittman had a 29.8, almost 30% target share from Minshew, only 24% from Richardson. And Downs and Pierce both had lower. Well, Downs was pretty much the same, but Pierce had a lower target share from Richardson. Running backs had a lower target share from Richardson. Tight end, Gardner Minshew, 19% from target share from him. Or God damn it. Gardner Minshew, 19% target share to tight ends. Anthony Richardson, 31.6. Now, obviously, it's like a 3 or 4 game sample size. But I just think Anthony Richardson is the way better quarterback for the team, but not necessarily for stat padding a volume reliant receiver like Michael Pittman. Because the reason he was good last year, and I posted that I didn't like Pittman for fantasy this season, and everyone was like, "Oh, he was good because he got fucking 8 to 10 catches a game." Yeah, I know. Like I have no idea. Like he was so consistent last year. I tried to trade for him in multiple leagues. I just don't think that's going to be the case with Richardson. And once again, I have a Twitter thread on this percent of fantasy points based on receptions. So Pittman was a wide receiver 13, and I charted all the top 12 wide receivers, and Pittman, his percent of fantasy points based on receptions is miles higher than anyone else. So Pittman, 43.9% of his fantasy points, almost half his fantasy points were just based on receptions, which once again, I'm just expecting that to go down with Richardson. The next closest in the top 10 was Davante Adams and Keenan Allen at 38.8%. Like there are multiple guys here in the 20%. Most of them are lower 30%. Those couple guys, and I guess Jamar Chase at 38% would be somewhat close to Pittman, but he goes in the same realm as like Stephon Diggs, DJ Moore, Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, Devontae Smith, Tank Dell. I think I would rather have all those guys because they all have just way more upside. So last guy is Davante Adams. Once again, this is the only other thing I fucked up in my draft guide. I promise. I've learned from my mistakes. I said he was going as a wide receiver 9. That's because his expert consensus ranking is wide receiver 9, but his ADP, like his actual average draft positions, wide receiver 12, which same thing as Pittman. That didn't really affect my opinion. I still think that's a fade because guys that go after Davante Adams is Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, and Mike Evans, who I would take all of them over Davante Adams. And that's just receivers. Like there's probably a few running backs around there that I might prefer to. Adams was the wide receiver 10 last season, and which is why he has such a high ADP. But he was the wide receiver 15 in points per game. He only had 4 top 12 finishes as a wide receiver. Literally, Jacoby Myers had 6. Davante Adams had 3 wide receiver 2 finishes and 3 finishes outside the top 60 wide receivers. That's pretty bad for a guy that you got to draft in like the mid-second round, in my opinion. The Raiders also added Brock Bowers. Not good for Davante Adams, no matter how you look at it. Adams has also seen a little bit of dip in efficiency from 2021 to now. So yards per route run, 2021 was 2.81, 2022 was 2.45, and now he's below 2 at 1.97. Yards per target went from 9.2 to 8.4 to now 6.5. Yards after catch per reception went from 4.9 up to 6.0 down to 3.3. His game average last season was 6 catches for 67 yards and half a touchdown, meaning every other game he'd score. He's going to be turning 32 in, I want to say December this season. It's at some point during the season. I think it's December. So he's not getting any better as a player. He's not getting any younger, and his situation debatably is getting worse. That's all it is for me. And a lot of people want to talk about, oh, like he was fucked by McDaniels, and now he has this huge upgraded quarterback in Gardner Minshew. I did not notice a ginormous difference in going from McDaniels to Pierce. Like obviously they did try to get him more involved, but if you look at the first half of the season and the second half of the season, it just doesn't move the needle for me after I've done all this other research that I think we should be fading Davante Adams. And as for Gardner Minshew, like I said, I'm a Colts fan. I don't really know how much of an upgrade that really is. Obviously, I would take Gardner Minshew, but is going from a fifth round rookie, fourth or fifth round rookie that was surprisingly decent last year to probably the best backup quarterback in the league, probably, bottom 5 starter realistically. Is that enough for me to be like, oh shit, this is a huge upgrade? Like, I want Davante Adams now. No, it does not move the fucking needle for me. So anyway, I've been yapping a while. I'm going to be posting multiple videos per week now. So stay tuned for the next one. But thank you guys for listening, and we will wrap this up.